Oh my God. Like, illiteracy is very bad, bro. Illiteracy, ignorance essentially is very bad. So, I'm going to have to start the story from scratch, right? So once again, the story is called, I just spoke to ChatGPT about I did some fact checking with ChatGPT, right? And I discovered that I had it was like I said, in school, they didn't teach us anything about America in school. They just told us that in social studies, and we had a great social studies teacher, right? He just told us about how Christopher Columbus founded America, period. They didn't say anything more than that, right? So I thought it was the British that funded Columbus's expedition, right? But apparently it was the Spanish monarchy, right? So my story was predicated on the fact that it was the British. So we have to switch out that part. So we're starting the story again. Bear with me, okay? Or bear with me, I'm bearing myself, essentially. So the story starts off with David, right? The story is called Next of Kin. It's about Goliath, his 5 brothers, America, Christopher Columbus, and Lapis Lazuli. We'll get there. Okay, cool. So the story starts off with David, right? David goes to pick 5 stones, right? One for Goliath, the rest for his brothers, right? So David ends up killing Goliath. And according to the Bible, everybody flees, right? The Philistines, they were so afraid they ran away, right? But that had a adverse effect on the Philistines, on everybody in the world generally, because those giants, right, the brothers of Goliath, right, they didn't die. David didn't kill them. It was just Goliath that he killed, right? Prior to that time, people had thought that they were like gods, essentially, because they were very tall. They thought that they could not bleed, essentially, right? So when David killed them, it was killed Goliath. Everybody was like, if a 17-year-old boy can kill one of you, it means number 1, you people can bleed, and then number 2, you people can die. So imagine what a whole army will do to you, right? So one of the brothers of Goliath, so one of the abilities giants have, is they have it's just like normal humans, right? But everything is heightened with them, right? So they can hear discussions happening very far away. So one of the giants essentially overheard the men thought that they were whispering, right? But they overheard how the Philistines, their own men essentially, was talking about how all of them can band together and kill those giants, kill the brothers of Goliath. Why? Not because they had anything against them, but because they were spending a lot of money and a lot of resources just feeding them, making sure that they were fine. And now, because they thought that they could not die, as you understand. So now that they knew that they could die, they were like, let's just kill these people. They're taking too much resources. And they are basically impoverishing the nation, essentially. So one of the brothers of Goliath heard that, and then he told his other 4 brothers. So they came up with a plan, and their plan was to escape, essentially, just one. So at night, they ran. That night, they ran away, and then they just ran and ran and ran and ran as fast as their giant legs could carry them. And eventually, they ran into some caves for safety, right? They ran into a cave in Afghanistan, and then they bolted the door. Do you know how they rolled a stone over the door, essentially? Do you know how, the same way Jesus rolled, a stone was rolled over the tomb of Jesus, right? Okay, and then that an angel had to unroll the stone, something like that. So they found this cave in Afghanistan, the 5 brothers of Goliath. We'll give them names, I don't know. So they found this tomb, and then they rolled the stone over it. They rolled the stone over the tomb. And then they stayed inside that tomb. Now, unknowing to them, that tomb in Afghanistan, that cave in Afghanistan, had a lot of lapis lazuli. Now, lapis lazuli to normal human beings is just it's just like a jewelry, something that we like to look at, just something. It's just eye candy to us, right? But to giants, right, it has a special effect on them. It slows down their metabolism. It drops it to almost 0 and puts them. It's like DMT. You know what DMT is to humans, right? That's what lapis lazuli is kind of like to giants, right? So when the brothers of Goliath entered that cave in Afghanistan, they didn't know the cave was rich in lapis lazuli. So immediately they entered. They just barely rolled the stone, and they went into this state of coma, essentially. And that thing dropped their metabolism to 0. So which means that they did not have to eat. They did not have to excrete. They didn't have to do any of those stuff. They did not have to do any of that stuff. So they were in that cave for thousands of years, essentially. They were sleeping, right? And they were discovered by... eventually people found them, right? But they thought that since that they were sleeping, they should just let them sleep in the cave, right? So fast forward to the Knights of the Templar. So the Knights of the Templar, they were fighting, essentially. They were fighting Lord Saladin. And they discovered that so they tried to attack the kingdom of Lord Saladin, right? And discovered that Lord Saladin did not really, and his men, they didn't really care for that much for the kingdom. There was something else they were protecting, right? So they called for like a ceasefire, right? And then they went to meet Saladin, and they were like, they're crusaders, they've fought a lot of crusades, right? They've been on a lot of campaigns, and they are so impressed with how well the men of Lord Saladin were fighting, and they were not afraid to die. And like, what were they protecting that much? Were they fighting on behalf of their god? Were they fighting on behalf of their city? But they did not know why. And Saladin was like, oh, it's a secret. That actually what they are defending is they are trying to save the world. It's not about them alone. They are trying to save the whole world. And the Templars are like, the whole world, why are they trying to defend, why are they protecting the world from? And then he told them the whole story about the giants, about David, about Goliath, about his brothers, and how they are lying in this cave in Afghanistan, right? Which was at the time one of his conquered territories, right? I don't know if that's historically correct, but yeah. So and then it was like, but like he doesn't think it's safe for them to stay there, like, because he himself he has been under attack, not only from them but from some of his Arabian brothers, right? Some nations were trying to like usurp him as the Arabian leader, essentially. So I did not know how long he could like, and sometimes he had to like fight on both sides. Do you understand? He had to like defend his empire from different ends, right? And on top of that, there was a lot of like small military uprisings, and he would have to like send his men. Sometimes he would have to dispatch like a legion, sometimes 50,000 men, just to like quell all this like small, these mini military campaigns, and those things were taking a toll on his army, right? So it wasn't even, and to combine with how much like resources they had spent fighting and resisting the Knights Templar, right? That I wasn't sure that it would be able to like defend the cave, and at the same time keep it a secret, and at the same time continue with his campaign, right? So him and the Knights Templar, and the Knights Templar were like, oh wow, that that's like a problem they would like to have, that they should outsource that problem to him, that they would transport the giants to England, right? And to Europe, essentially. They'll transport the giants to Europe. And they'll keep them there where it's safe, right? Because at the time the Knights Templar had like conquered Europe, so they didn't think that anything could go wrong in Europe. And Saladin was like, okay. But there was a problem. I said that the reason why the giants were like in that state of coma, or let's just call it coma, was because of Lapis Lazuli, right? So the monarch, essentially, so the Lord Saladin and the Knights Templar, they reached like an agreement where Saladin would constantly supply the monarchy in England with like a lot of like Lapis Lazuli, right? They would disguise it as like carpets, essentially. They'll be like, oh, they were paying tributes to the monarchy in England, but it was more so like periodically they would ship like a lot. They'll send ships with loads of Lapis Lazuli, and it was very top secret. It was very, but to the general public, it was just tributes. They were sending tributes to. That was the general explanation that they gave the public, that they were sending tributes to Lord Saladin, was sending tributes to the monarchy in England to thank them for, essentially. I don't want to get into that, right? But meanwhile, the reason why he was sending all those like Lapis Lazuli was so that they could keep applying it to the giants, right? To keep them from like waking up, essentially, because you would grind the Lapis Lazuli and then apply the dust to the giants. That's how you kept them asleep, essentially. So that worked for a while, and then England started growing in power and in strength, and the population started increasing. So I don't know how, but we'll weave Stonehenge into this in one way or the other. Maybe this Stonehenge was initially constructed to house the giants, or something like that. Like I said, this is pre-draft of pre-draft. So essentially, they were there. and then the Spanish. Sorry, give me a second. So essentially, initially, they thought about like keeping the giants in England, which is why they were building Stonehenge. But if you look at Stonehenge, it's not completed. Why was it not completed? Well, because they changed their mind and they were like, you know what? And they used all like the latest technology, including like esoteric knowledge, to build Stonehenge because they wanted to build they wanted to simulate the cave in Afghanistan for the giants, right? But eventually they changed their mind because they discovered that, what we call Ibiza now, right? The island of Ibiza in Spain was like a better place to keep the giants. So the British monarchy contacted the Spanish monarchy and they kept the giants in Ibiza, right? Ibiza, I think it's called Ibiza, right? So the giants were there. And then, again, like I said, the population of like Spain started growing. I'll find a better excuse instead of population was growing, right? But something happened and then they needed to like find a new home for the giants. And they wanted to return them to England, but at that time, the English monarch was like, nope, that they cannot handle it. But that if there's any assistance that the Spanish monarch would need, that they will support them with it. So the Spanish monarch started looking for like a way to like somewhere else they could relocate the giants, right? And that's when they found, and then they created this bounty program, right? Underground was like an underground bounty program that anybody that could like find like a new home for the giants would be immensely rewarded, right? So there was this Italian sailor, adventurer essentially, that studied a lot of maps growing up, aka Christopher Columbus. He heard his friend told him about the bounty, right? And he was like, oh fuck, he's going to take it up. So he went to see the Spanish monarch. He convinced the King Ferdinand or something like that, according to ChatGPT. It was one that told me the history behind, Christopher Columbus, because I went to do some fact checking. So essentially that Ferdinand guy, right? And his wife, he told them that, look, that he was going to take over and do the task, right? So they asked him what he was going to need, and he was like, oh, they should just give him like 5 ships with giants and then enough supplies, and him and his men would like they won't stop sailing until they found a home for the giants, essentially. So they were like, no, that this is like a very serious case, right? This is like, so they agreed. First of all, they were happy that they found like someone that was willing to take the task, because a lot of people were just like, nope. So Columbus was like, the worst that would happen that was that if he sailed around the world and he didn't find any virgin land, that he was just going to like sink himself and his ship and all the men, all of them, with giants, all of them would just drown. Do you understand? So it was like a kamikaze mission, if you think about it. So the Spanish monarchy, they were very happy about it. So they took their best general, right? And they said, okay, you know what? We'll give you 20 ships, 5 ships to house each of the brothers of Goliath, right, with their own crew. Another 5 ships just for supplies, and then 10 ships would house like military soldiers, essentially. So just in case anything went wrong on the water, maybe the giants woke up or anything, they'll fight to the death and sink the ship, kamikaze style, right? Okay, cool. So Columbus was very happy. And then they started sailing. Now, this is where the story starts, right? So the story is going to open with Columbus. It's going to open with a coup, essentially. So America has, I think, I don't know how many, I forgot to ask ChatGPT, how many stars on the American flag. I think it's 50, I don't know. Okay, so let's just say they had been sailing on the water for 50 days, right? And the men had started grumbling, right? They were grumbling because Columbus, they just thought he was incompetent. Number one, because the generals, I said there were 10 ships that were generals, essentially. They had like military people. They didn't like the idea that it was Columbus that was like a captain. They didn't like taking orders from him because he was a civilian and he didn't have any qualifications in except that he was like an adventurer. And they did not like that. They didn't like the idea that he was an adventurer. They didn't like it, right? And they didn't like taking orders from him because military people don't like taking out orders from civilians, essentially. So, and that was one. And then number two, they just Columbus did not really know what he was doing, right? Because, if you don't know where you're going, everywhere's going to look like it. So they would like dock on an island, and they would be excited that they had found the new world where they will put the brothers of the Goliath, and Columbus will be so convinced that it's a new place, and they will get there and they'll find out that, oh, maybe the soil there is very porous, maybe the island is very small, and then they'll have to like pack up again and leave. And they have done this many times, and even sometimes they would like, Columbus will like misread the navigation, right? And they would end up in some islands they had already checked out, right? So they were like, why are we even like, why are we listening to this guy? He's just taking us on this merry-go-round, Sometimes, so they were like, number one, he's not competent. Number two, we don't like taking orders from him. And then number three, I said that it was Lapis Lazuli, right? That they used to keep the giants in that state of limbo, right? They would grind the Lapis Lazuli, and the dust they would apply it to the giants, right? Okay, cool. Now they were running out of Lapis Lazuli, and the giants could wake up anytime, right? So there was a growing like unrest on the ship, and they were just drifting aimlessly on the water. So they were like, fuck it. So the general and his men, they planned a coup, and they were like, this night we attack. So the story starts off with a coup, right? A coup against Columbus, right? So they're attacking Columbus. They get on the water, right, Holy Spirit? Yeah, okay, cool. So they jump inside the water, they dive into the water, those men, and they will swim to Columbus' ship. So Columbus' ship is usually ahead of their ship, or like let's say 1 kilometer ahead of them, right? It was like the scouts. Think of it like as a scout. If you ever seen like a motorcade or an entourage like in moving, there's like all these scouts, like all these guys on bikes in front, right? Okay, cool. So the ship and then the president or whosoever would be at the back, the dignitary would be at the back, right, in the middle-ish. So it was kind of like that. So Columbus' ship was like in front, right? Was like 1 kilometer away from them. So they jumped into the water and then they swam to Columbus. But they underestimated Columbus, right? Because Columbus had envisaged that he was actually a very smart guy. He had envisaged that something like there will be an unrest at some point. Do you understand? So him and his men, they had like planted this like nets inside the water, right? And it was attached to their ship essentially. So when the men of the generals, they jumped inside the water and they swam to Columbus, essentially, they were caught up in the nets and, just like fish, essentially. And then, Columbus men, they hoisted them up to the mast and they were just dangling like that. So, number one, the men felt very ashamed. And then the general essentially felt even more ashamed because it proved that, number one, Columbus was very, very smart. And his men now, and he looked like a fool, essentially, because he meant that Columbus was actually a smart guy. And he probably they were underestimating him, essentially. And that, like, rekindled the belief the soldiers had in him, his own men had in him. Essentially, it just made the general look like a fool, right? So the general had no choice. He wasn't happy, but he had no choice to, respect Columbus and take orders from him now, right? So that's how he quelled the uprising, right? But they still had a problem. They had run out of Lapis Lazuli at this point. And they had applied the last one, and the giants were already showing signs of like waking up, right? So they had to find the new world, essentially. So fast forward, essentially, they stumbled on, according to ChatGPT, the first place Columbus found was the Bahamas, right? Okay, so in this story, I'll just say they found the Bahamas, right? But I'll say that this is like, so the way we're going to do it is that I asked ChatGPT what part of America has the highest deposit of Lapis Lazuli, and he said it was California and Colorado. So in this story, right, the giants are going to be relocated they're going to be split. 3 of them are going to be in California, 2 of them are going to be in Colorado. There's this, so I used to go to the Colorado airport every time. And sometimes anytime I'm there, in my head, I'll be like, hey, maybe I should just explore Colorado, right? So there's this place in Colorado. There's a lot of mountains there. I think it's called Bull something. I used to see it on like booking.com. I've forgotten. I used to see some houses there. Anyways, we check some nice locations in Colorado. Some nice mountainous locations in Colorado. And the other day I was on a plane with this guy and he was telling me that he used to go mountain climbing in Colorado. Okay, we'll just find one nice mountain in Colorado and we'll say that the giants are buried somewhere there. So 2 of the giants, we'll allocate them to Colorado, and then 3 of them are going to be in California because Lapis Lazuli, right? So essentially, the story is Columbus successfully, the story essentially ends in, because according to ChatGPT, Columbus never set foot in America, and it was in the Bahamas, right? Lie. So in this case, we say it was a lie and it was a cover-up. That actually, it just stopped in the Bahamas to refuel, essentially, to get Lapis Lazuli, right? A little supply of Lapis Lazuli, and then the people in Bahamas like told him about America, the proper America, and that they told him that they told him about California essentially, and he asked them where their supply of Lapis Lazuli came from, and then they said that they harvested it from Colorado and today's California. That they had to go far to find it in Colorado and today's California, essentially. Today's California, in California, right? So essentially, he had to go there. He went there, but all this part is undocumented. And any story that you hear about Columbus and is a lie. This is like the real story. That's how we're going to frame it in the story, right? Very cool. So essentially, in the story, Columbus transports the giants to, again, keeps 2 of them in the mountains in Colorado, and then the other 3 in California, right? Okay, cool. And then, so it's successful, and that's how the new world was founded, right? Okay, cool. So that'll be like part 1 of the story. Then the part 2 of the story is now about how the giants are now about to wake up, and how okay. I don't know if I should include this one. Should I include this one? Okay, he said no. Okay. So I was just going to say, yeah, no. Let's just say that's part 1 of the story. I'll go to do part 2. I don't want to rush it. So let's just say part 1. That's the part 1 of the story. That's part 1 of like, the story. The part 2 is like a part 1 essentially. But it's about how the giants are about, how, fast forward to modern times, the giants are about to wake up. Yeah, the giants are about to wake up. And unlike before, where they have to, and now NASA is overseeing the project essentially, and different things can be proposed to. All sorts of stuff have been proposed essentially. Even the space race, right, was about relocating. In fact, some people propose relocating the giants to like space, to orbit, to the moon. It was actually one of the I'll say it was actually one of the objectives of the Apollo, I don't know, it's Apollo 13, the mission that Neil Armstrong was on. We'll say that it was one of the objectives of that mission, to see if they could like relocate those like giants to the moon and just gonna keep them there, and they just die there or something. They don't care, right? Because there's nowhere on Earth they could move them to, and now the public is very, very aware. And then it's the modern world, there are cameras, there, everything. So they need like a solid plan to like transport the giants, because they're about to wake up. And the Lapis Lazuli, they are now. The thing is, how in real life there's something called tolerance, where if you take like a drug, where human beings have tolerance, where if you take something, right, let's say rice, if you eat some rice, right, just tolerance. I don't want to explain tolerance, right? So essentially the giants, the Lapis Lazuli is not having as much the strong effect it used to have before. Let's just say they've developed immunity to it, right? So NASA has been applying a lot of Lapis Lazuli. They found some more chemicals over the years that they can apply to them, but it's not really working. The giants are about to wake up, right? So they need a plan. So my initial, just said I should not use this one, right? But I'm just going to put it there. So I wanted to say that COVID was like a cover-up, right? Was one of the reasons why we had COVID was like a cover-up, right? For the giants, right? So they wanted everybody indoors so that they could like move the giants to safely transport the giants, right? Or try to kill them, something like that, right? But I want to make the story good vibes only. And a lot of people, those people said no. The reason, because a lot of people, COVID was like a traumatic period for people. So you don't want to be doing throwback for, if anybody hears the story, you don't want them to be having throwback for COVID and stuff like that. So it's like, it's supposed to be good vibes only. So no COVID. We'll just find another event. We'll find another event. So that's so part 1 ends there, and then we'll do part 2 later. Right, Holy Spirit? Right. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, so the part 2 is going to have it's going to have Hitler, Werner von Braun, the guy behind the V2 rockets, the coalition. Like, it's going to have church. It's going to have everybody inside it. It's going to be nice, Essentially, the reason why the Americans did not kill von Braun, it's going to have Hitler. It's going to have his right hand man. How they eventually learned about they learned about the giants, right? But they did not know that the giants they thought the giants were still in England, right? And they did not know that because the plan to move the giants from England to Ibiza was super secret. In fact, the men that moved the giants from England to Ibiza, all of them were killed. They sent when they were coming back from Ibiza, right? The English monarch sent a group of soldiers and they killed them. And then they killed those men. Now, the men that killed those men, when they were coming back to England, the English monarch sent another wave of soldiers and killed them. So that secret never came out. Nobody knew what happened, right? So when Hitler was doing his research, right, eventually he thought that the giants were in England, right? And then this is why during the war, he developed he commissioned Werner von Braun to develop the V2 rockets, and that's why they hit England. That was the purpose of hitting England. That's why they hit England on that Sunday morning. I think it was Sunday, right? Because they thought that the giants were still in England, and it was the location that they thought that the giants were in. That's why they sent the V2 rockets there. So the whole part 2 ties into Werner von Braun, Adolf Hitler, America, and why they took in Werner von Braun, because they thought that maybe they could actually blow up Hitler. Maybe we even include Oppenheimer. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe I'll watch Oppenheimer and maybe we'll include him inside this whole thing. But I don't know yet. Let's just see. It's what the Holy Spirit told me now. But part 2 is for that. Let us do this part 1 first, and then part 2 will come later. Okay, so the obvious question now is why don't they just kill the giants by dropping let's say a bomb on them, right? Well, you can't do that because remember I said they've been taking inhaling Lapis Lazuli for the past 2,000 years. So what that has done to their body is that it has made them they've slowly turned into crystalline. They are crystalline beings. You know how in the Bible just, giants are essentially half angels, right? They're half angels, half human beings according to the Bible, right? Because some angels came down and slept with women, and that's how giants were born, right? The Nephilim, essentially. So, and angels in the Bible are described to be crystalline in nature. So, for instance, Daniel, in the book of Daniel, right? When Daniel saw angel Michael, right? Well, maybe it was Gabriel. He described how his body was topaz, essentially. That it was adorned with topaz. In the Bible too, talking about Lucifer, God talked about how Lucifer was imbued with stones. So angels are technically crystalline beings, right? But these giants being half angels, they are half crystalline essentially. So the Lapis Lazuli they've been taking over years has now fully transformed them into full angels. So now they are full blown angels lying down dormant, right? So if they mistakenly wake up, so that's why the Americans have not blown them up, just drop a bomb on them and kill them, because number one, the bomb will not work because their bodies has transformed to this impenetrable crystal, right? And then they now they are they don't even look human again. They look straight they look like angels. So essentially, imagine 2 angels inside in Colorado mountains and then 3 in California. So that's why essentially. So that's part 1. Again, part 2 is going to drop very soon, by God's grace. When the Holy Spirit tells me what's coming next in part 2.